Hello my friends, it's Ranger Russ from the Meigs Nature Center, getting ready to bring you a live amphibian program, specifically frogs. We're going to be talking about frogs, but I want to remind everyone that the Meigs Nature Center is currently closed. You can still visit Hammonasset, but unfortunately you can't come into the building. We are doing live programs, Facebook Live, and then we put some things on YouTube. The Facebook Live every Tuesday through Friday at 11 o'clock. So make sure you log in. If you don't catch them live, you can watch them after on YouTube. You can go to meigspointnaturecenter.org's virtual learning center, and you can view all the programs. I think we're up over 150 videos we've done so far. Lots of different topics. Okay? Make sure that you follow us and like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. As soon as I get 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, I'll be able to start doing mobile YouTube programs. So look for those programs coming up as soon as I hit 1,000 subscribers. Okay, so frogs. Now, you might hear them moving around on the side here. They keep on hopping around. But before we get into that, we need to say, what is a frog? Frogs are amphibians. And what an amphibian is, it's an animal that spends part of its life in the water, completely aquatic. So they actually will breathe water, they live in the water, they eat things that are in the water. Their whole lives are in the water for part of their life cycle. And then they metamorph into a different looking animal and hop out and live on land. Sometimes they return to the water, and as an adult they will stay in the water, and sometimes they will just be on land until it's time to lay their eggs and go back into the water. Now in Connecticut we've got two major groups of amphibians. We've got salamanders and we've got frogs. Salamanders can be divided into two groups. There's a subgroup of salamanders called newts. Typically, newts are animals that spend their adult life stage back in the water, and salamanders spend their juvenile stage or youth stage in the water and their adult stage out on land. Now, let's start with frogs. So that we have, 12 different kinds of salamanders in Connecticut, and I think there are 7 of those that are listed. So unfortunately, amphibians worldwide are in decline, including the salamanders and some of the frogs that we have here in Connecticut. But let's take a look at our first frog. So we keep them in these little baggies when we are doing programs typically, and I would hold them up and show you what they look like in the bag. But because we are live, we don't want to show you in a bag because you're not here. And our first frog is a green frog. Okay? He's already starting to chirp a little bit. And this is a boy. You can tell it's a boy because the males have large ear rings. So that temporal circle right behind the eye is its ear. I should hold it up to the mic because he's chattering away. Now he's going to be quiet. Okay. Now, green frog's very beautiful frog. They've got a beautiful metallic green. Most of the time, they've got that metallic green color. They live around almost any body of water, whether it be large rivers, streams, ponds, lakes, all the bodies of water across Connecticut, even vernal pools. And they have a really unusual behavior. So when you approach them, they make a distress call, a warning call to all the other frogs. And it's sort of a high-pitched peep, and then they hop away. Most of the time when they're content and just sitting, their call is a little bit different. So we're going to play the call of the green frog. So hopefully you guys can hear that. Many people liken it to a banjo twang. So that was the call, and that's a really common call in the summer evenings. You'll hear them really active around ponds. As it gets warmer during the day, they become less active. You still might hear their call, though, in the summertime. So again, this is a frog that lives right around water, swimming in the water on the edges of the water. Now we're going to talk about the habitats where you can find frogs in Connecticut, and you're going to find that this is actually a very unusual frog for two reasons. Number one, that it's green, and number two, that it lives around water. Two very common things that everybody thinks, oh, frogs, they're green, and they live around the water. Which we're going to see with our other frogs, not so much. Now here's a good time to let you know that you can put questions and comments up, whether you're watching on YouTube or on Facebook, and we'll try and answer them as we go. So, do we have any questions yet?
Nope.
All right. And we're going to move on to another frog here. Where did it go? Here we go. This one's really amazing. And this one is another one. People misidentify this frog a lot. And when I take it out, I'm going to give everybody a chance to guess what kind of frog it is. And we will see how accurate you are. This guy is slippery. So here's a good time to tell you that before I do this program, I rinse my hands a lot. I do not want any soap or any materials on my hands, any foreign things on my hands as I'm doing this program. Frogs can absorb things directly through their skin, so we want to be really careful that there's nothing on my skin that it might be able to absorb. So let's see if we have a guess what kind of frog this is. Take a look at the yellow on the underside, yellow legs, and front legs and back legs. Now, this frog typically is not, again, going to be found around water. It will be around ponds, but very often this frog is found in wet fields. Even your lawn, if it's moist enough, this frog will be hopping around your lawn. We don't have any water at our house, but we have these frogs hopping all around the lawn. Any guesses yet as to what kind of frog this is? Okay. I'm going to tell you, first of all, most people see this frog and they think...
One guess is a toad.
It is not a toad. It is a frog. We'll get into the difference. Another one. Okay.
Another guess is leopard frog.
Leopard frog. That's the one that most people think this is. Across the country, leopard frogs are very common. One of the most numerous frogs in North America. Here in Connecticut, leopard frogs are an endangered species. This looks a lot like a leopard frog, but leopard frogs have much more regular spots, and they have a more of a ring around their spots. So if you kind of see this has an outline around its spots, typically though the leopard frog has a much more defined spot on its back. So this is a pickerel frog. Pickerel frogs and leopard frogs are both toxic. They secrete a toxin, a poison. It doesn't affect us. We would have to consume lots of the poison to be affected by it, but for other frogs and other animals, it is a toxin. If another animal were trying to eat a pickerel or a leopard frog, it probably wouldn't kill them, but it would taste really bad. It would give them a really bad feeling, and they probably would not try to eat it. They'd probably spit it out, even if they did some damage to it. They're still not going to eat it. But if you expose the poison, if you put these frogs in with other frogs, then they're going to poison the other frogs, because again, they can absorb things directly through their skin. So this frog would absorb, or another frog would absorb the toxins from this frog right through its skin, and it can seriously affect, it could even kill smaller frogs. So we're going to play the call of the pickerel frog. So there are some... That is a spring peeper, and the long trilling one, that's the pickerel frog. So there are lots of different calls in there. That long grinding one, that is a pickerel frog. Okay, The spring peeper that you heard in there, so there's a good segue to our next frog. I don't have a spring peeper to look at, but I have another tree frog. The spring peeper is one of the loudest animals in Connecticut. I believe it's the second loudest in Connecticut. They can reach 120 decibels, which is a jet engine noise flying overhead, and it can be deafening. The frog that I have, the other tree frog we have, so we have spring peepers and we have gray tree frogs. So the gray tree frogs, they can climb on trees. Yes, they went to the bathroom on me, but that's okay. And they can stick to just about anything. So you can imagine this frog climbing a tree. It would be able to stick right to the tree, climb up any tree it wants. Notice the color of its skin. It's sort of gray, like the bark of an oak tree. Okay, so that gray mottled pattern on it will blend right in with the bark of a tree as it climbs up. Now, if you look underneath, it's got a flash of yellow under it. Okay, that is typically a warning to other animals that this one is poisonous or toxic. In this case, it's not. That's a false warning that this frog is giving off. Now, an amazing thing about gray tree frogs, when it gets dark at night, they turn dark, almost black. When it gets hot during the day, they turn white. They're not changing color because of light and dark. They're changing color because of temperature. Fortunately for them, temperature coincides with light and dark. Typically, as it's brighter, it's warmer, and as it gets darker, it gets cooler. So that will trigger their color change, the temperature, and that gives them better camouflage. So let's play the call of the gray tree frog. Many of you will recognize this call. So that long trilling call, that is the gray tree frog. And in the springtime, when these frogs go down by the water to lay their eggs, many times they'll go to people's swimming pools to lay their eggs. And that's something all frogs, they do lay eggs. They will go down and they will be singing all around your swimming pool. A really cool thing about frogs compared to salamanders, he wants to face the camera. I cannot turn him around to get his back to you guys. So we'll just let him face the camera. I think he's thinking about hopping over and trying to grab onto the camera. Frogs lay their eggs in clumps. Salamanders also lay their eggs in clumps. The salamanders' eggs have a surrounding coat around them, where the frogs, it's just a group of eggs. But then the toads are very different, and we're going to talk about toads in a second. So 2 tree frogs in Connecticut, and they will spend most of the time up in the tops of trees, the spring peeper and the gray tree frog. You can see that's actually what it would do if we're on the branch of a tree. He really wants to face you guys. No matter how I turn, he turns. This is so cool. Look at this. All right. So this is one of my favorite animals. These guys just are absolutely amazing. Now, they are quite a bit larger than the spring peeper. Spring peepers, I knew he was going to do that. Wow. He just did a Superman leap, grabbed onto the edge of the table, and he's hanging on the table right now. That was absolutely amazing. He's so cool. Actually, this is probably a girl. I'm just saying he. Probably a girl just because it's bigger and the girls are larger than the boys in the frog world, typically. Now, the spring peeper only gets about, the males will be about 1 inch, females 1.5 inches long, so much, much smaller than the gray tree frog. When the gray tree frogs are small, it is hard to tell a spring peeper from a gray tree frog. I think that the gray tree frogs have bigger sticky pads on the ends of their toes, but not a guaranteed way of telling them apart. So let's move on to toads, since I mentioned the toads. Let's see if I can get him back into his baggie here. There he goes. Look at that, he's doing a Spider-Man. Each side of the bag. Look how bright he is underneath. So typically when we do this program, we would pass the frog around in the Ziploc bag. They can survive in this Ziploc bag for days. They won't run out of oxygen. They'll probably starve to death or dehydrate before they run out of oxygen. They don't need a whole lot of oxygen. So let's move on to our toad. Here it is. So we've got a couple of different kinds of toads here at Hammonasset, the American toad and the Fowler's toad. And you know what? I have to look and see which one I have here. Very strong. Oh, I think this is a Fowler's toad. And he just peed too. Okay, so what do toads do? Everybody says if you handle toads, they give you warts. Typically, if you handle toads, they're going to pee on you. They do not give you warts. The pee does not give you warts, so you don't have to worry about that. They do have little venom glands up on the top here, little toxin glands. Okay. And typically, when you pick them up like this, the boys will chatter at you, and the girls will be quiet. So this is a girl, okay, not chattering. The reason they do that is during breeding season, the males are going around grabbing a whole bunch of frogs, and if a male grabs another male, he'll chatter and tell the male that you don't have a female and you need to move on. So that's typically what they do. Now, toads are a subgroup within frogs, which means that there's a slight difference between toads and frogs. In Connecticut, our toads have dry, warty skin. But in other places in the world, our toads look just like our frogs. Or other people's toads look like our frogs. And in some places in the world, people have toads that look like or frogs that look like our toads. So not a great way to tell them apart. The real way that you can tell them apart, toads don't have teeth. Now, how many of you knew that frogs had teeth? They do. They have a mouth full of teeth. And when they bite onto you, they can scrape just a little bit. It's like rubbing sandpaper across your fingers. They're not big teeth, but they do have teeth. Toads are toothless. So there's a good way to remember. Toads are toothless. So do we have a call for the Fowler's toad or the American toad? We have the Fowler's toad.
Yeah.
All right. Spring peeper in there again. They're in all the frog calls. It's that almost screaming call. And if you visit the nature center in the springtime, you will hear that call around our garden pond, our friendship pond. That call will be going for hours sometimes. It sits there and does it. Can you do the American toad?
Yeah.
And do we have any questions? Any questions so far? Comments? Everybody having a good time out there? All right, we're going to put the toad back.
American toad call.
Okay, here's the American toad.
Wait, 1 second.
Coming up. Spring peeper again with it. That's the American toad. You can hear that also at Hammonasset in the springtime. Now, another difference between frogs and toads, I said frogs lay their eggs in masses, toads lay their eggs in strings. So if you see eggs, typically they're going to lay their eggs in water that's not moving. So it needs to be standing water, vernal pools, small ponds, things like that, swimming pools. The toad's eggs will be long strings. They look like strings of little black pearls. The frog eggs are in masses. Okay, so that's a way you can tell frog eggs from toad eggs. All right, let's move on. And let me talk a little bit about what these animals eat, because frogs are carnivores. What was that just flew by?
Monarch.
Monarch butterfly just flew by, and I missed it. So frogs are carnivores. They're predators. They're hopping around eating food. They don't eat things that are dead. They don't eat things that are not moving. All right? So their food needs to be alive and hopping around. This is another squirmy, slippery frog. This is one of the most amazing frogs in the entire world. It can compete with almost any animal in the entire world for being able to do something absolutely amazing. So this frog can freeze. All frogs freeze up a little bit in the winter. They'll bury themselves down a little bit, but the wood frog freezes into a cube of ice. It looks like a little ice cube, completely solid. They sort of have an antifreeze inside their blood cells that allows their blood to freeze without forming crystals. So that keeps them from damaging their cells when they thaw out. All frogs have a little bit of antifreeze and they can freeze somewhat, but this frog can freeze solid. Okay? Do we have the call for the wood frog? Let's do the wood frog call now. So see if anybody has a guess what they think that sounds like. It's almost like a chattering call. Some people think it sounds like a bark. So sometimes they call it a barking toad or frog. Do we have a comment or question?
Question. I don't see toads in the garden anymore. Are they declining?
So we do have toads in decline across in the entire world. Frogs, toads, salamanders, all amphibians are in decline, unfortunately. In the heat of the summer, though, they become more active at night. It gets too hot and dry. Even for a toad that likes it hot and dry, it gets too much for them, so they become more active in the evening. So it does become harder to see them in midsummer. Hopefully in the fall you'll see them pick up again. But yes, they are also in decline. So back to the wood frog. Now, I mentioned at the beginning, the green frog, it lives around ponds. But then the pickerel frog, it lives in fields. The gray tree frog and the spring peeper, they live up in trees. The toads, they like dry, more arid habitats, so the drier the gardens, the sandier soils, that's where they're going to live. The wood frog lives in the woods, in the forest. Its coloring matches the leaves of the forest, so it blends in with the leaf litter. So we've looked at all these frogs, and so far only the green frog was green, and only the green frog lives around water. The other ones, again, they go to the water to lay their eggs, but you're not going to typically see them around water for most of the year. A really cool thing about these, they have amazing camouflage, this reddish color. It looks like a leaf, right? I was doing a program when I was working at Rocky Neck. We were going through the woods, doing a woods walk, and I was talking about the wood frog and the fact that we probably would never see one because their camouflage is so good. And we're standing in a circle, and I was talking to people, and I was describing what the wood frog looked like, and a little boy points right between my feet and said, "Like that one?" And there was a wood frog literally right between my feet. It was really, really cool. Very special experience. I also want you to look at the black mark or the darker mark around its eye. That helps break up the silhouette for camouflage. Okay, we've got a question or a comment?
Question. Verna asks, why are they in decline? Humans? Question mark.
Good question. So, I did mention near the beginning that frogs can absorb things through their skin. All amphibians are capable of absorbing right through their skin. Some of the salamanders actually don't have lungs. They breathe through their skin. So they don't breathe through their mouth and lungs the way we think of. Because they absorb things right through their skin, one of the things that they're absorbing, or some of the things, are toxins, poisons that we are putting into the environment. Some of the things that we don't even consider poisonous. So if you over-fertilize your lawn and one of those pickerel frogs hops through that fertilizer, it can poison the pickerel frog and it will kill them. Pesticides, herbicides, lawn fertilizers, those are common things that we use regularly that will kill the animals. Other things that we put down our drains and end up in our rivers and waterways, those can also kill or harm the amphibians. So because we have put so much toxin into the environment, that's why our amphibians are in decline. We call amphibians indicator species because they are an indicator of how healthy our environment is. If a pond loses all its frogs and you notice all of a sudden that there aren't any frogs left, then you know that there's a toxin in the water, that there's something wrong with that habitat, and it needs to be explored further. The frogs will die off. After that, then you'll start to get the fish dying off and the turtles and other things. So frogs are the first one because they can absorb things through their skin. Okay, so are we ready for our last amphibian, our last frog? Now this one is commonly found around bodies of water, but again, it's not going to stay there. This is the bullfrog. And yes, it's that big. Okay? This is a male. Look at it, that giant temporal circle. Now, this really only works on the green frog and the bullfrog. It is a little bit green. If you watched my program at Mono Pond, I found one that was completely yellow. Bright yellow. Not just a little yellow. It was yellow. It was really awesome. And it was hopping through the forest. And that's what these frogs do. They will hang out around a pond, but when it's time to eat, they hop off into the forest and hunt for food. They eat things like other frogs. They will eat mice and birds and snakes and turtles, large insects, even fish or tadpoles or insect larvae that are swimming by. They will eat anything that moves and fits in their mouth. And that's typical of all frogs. They eat things that move and fit in their mouth. If it doesn't fit in their mouth, they might try and eat it, but they won't be able to. We have a comment or a question.
From Danielle, a great question. How far can they jump?
How far can they jump? So this is the frog that can jump the furthest of any of the frogs in Connecticut. And typically they're going to jump about 4 or 5 feet. But if you go to those fairs and frog jumping contests and things, the record I think is like 7 feet. So these frogs are great leapers. And they get larger than this too. This is big for Connecticut. This is not big for the rest of the country. Down south, they can grow. They have a longer growing season, so they will get bigger. Now, these frogs, most frogs, the eggs are laid in the spring, and about a month or so later, you've got a frog. In this case, they turn into tadpoles and then frogs. These can remain tadpoles for years. Sometimes 4 or 5 years, they can be a tadpole. And those tadpoles will be gigantic, just like the frog itself, before they emerge out. So that actually gives an advantage to that tadpole. It gives it a better chance of surviving once it's an adult, even though as a tadpole it may be eaten. A really cool thing about the wood frogs, they lay their eggs first. So they're the first ones. In February, they're hopping down to the water and laying their eggs. They will hatch out really early in March. Then all the other frogs come and lay their eggs, and the wood frog tadpoles go around and start eating the eggs of all the other frogs. So the other frogs are bringing food for the wood frogs, which I think is really cool. Okay, do we have a comment?
Question, how long do they live?
Good question. For most of the frogs, it's only about 4 or 5 years. Okay, I think the bullfrog can get a little bit longer, but for most frogs, it's 4 to 5 years. And do we have the call for the bullfrog?
We do.
You'll recognize this one, I think. Can you turn that up a little? No. There we go. It's like a giant bumblebee. Sometimes people think it sounds like a cow mooing. Do we have another question or a comment?
Yup. What eats a bullfrog?
What eats a bullfrog? Great question. Not other frogs, because they are the biggest, but lots of birds. So great blue heron, egrets, birds like that, otters and fisher and other weasels will eat them. Sometimes large fish like bass or catfish will also eat them. Raccoons. Snakes. For this frog, it would have to be a big snake, like a large northern water snake, but snakes will also eat them. So there are lots of things that eat them, and those same things eat the other frogs as well. So, he's going to do a little squirm here to try and get out. Look at the size of that paddle on there. That's why they're such strong swimmers. Look at the thickness of the leg. They also can regenerate. They have amazing regenerative qualities. We got one time that a fish hook had sliced its leg. Big gaping slice. The muscles were all hanging out. There was bone. We couldn't really get it to stay shut. But within a week, it had started closing up. And a month later, you couldn't even tell where the wound was. Completely healed. Another question or comment?
Another question. How much does the bullfrog weigh?
Good question. I'm not sure what this one weighs. I'm going to say... probably about 2 of your TV remotes at home. So I'm going to say about 16 ounces or so. I think a TV remote's about 8 ounces. What's a candy bar weigh? It's about 2 candy bars. So it looks pretty thick. You can see this is a good frog to talk about how they make their noise. They will pass air into their sac under here, and then as the air passes back into their lungs and goes back and forth, they don't do it out their mouth. They don't open their mouth. It's inside their body where they create that thrumming brom noise. All right. I love this frog. Usually he's really laid back just like this. He knows he's not going to get away, so he just chills out until it's time to go home. And then he'll get something to eat. Okay. So I mentioned the other frogs that we don't have in Connecticut, the pickerel frog and the spring peeper. I mean the leopard frog and the spring peeper. But those are the frogs that we have in Connecticut. I'd like everybody to put up what frog they think is the coolest or most amazing or has the most interesting thing about them. Maybe the most beautiful frog, whatever you think is the thing that you want to vote on. Let's see if we can have, because normally we do this as amphibian election, but we're going to do a vote. Which frog is the best frog in Connecticut? Let's see what kind of comments we get. All right, I was doing another program one time, and I had the bullfrog in a pillowcase in a bag on the stage, and there were 60 or more children in an auditorium, and I was talking about the frogs and passing them around, and before I got to the bullfrog, it knocked the bag over and rolled the bag across the stage behind the curtain. It was a lot of fun. So we have another comment or question?
Does New England have dart frogs?
We do not have poison dart frogs in Connecticut or even North America. Those are only down in South America. So you don't have to worry about those. Now there's a frog that can really poison a person. Sometimes even just by touching them. But definitely if you got it in your blood, you would be in trouble. Any other questions?
Nope.
Any people voting on which frog they like the best?
Yeah, we got a lot for the bullfrog and 2 for the gray tree frog.
Okay. Those are 2 really cool frogs. I'd have to say the gray tree frog's a little cooler in my book, but that's okay. Okay, I hope everybody enjoyed this frog program. We are going to have possums next week, same time, same place. They will be up here on Facebook, so make sure you tune in at 6:30 next Friday for that. We will continue to do programs from Tuesday to Friday at 11 o'clock on Facebook Live. And if we get enough subscribers, eventually we'll be doing it on YouTube Live as well. So make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us, and follow us on Facebook, and we'll do some more questions or comments.
Another...
Can she find them in Michigan?
Yeah, can Susan find all these frogs in Michigan?
So I'm not sure about all of the frogs in Michigan. I'm pretty sure that you've got the bullfrog and the green frog. Not sure about the spring peeper. I know you've got pickerel frogs over there, so I think most of these frogs you'll be able to see in Michigan. And there's actually a mink frog, I think, or a monk frog out west somewhere. So that's another cool frog. All right. I hope everybody enjoyed this program. I hope you learned something about the frogs that we have here in Connecticut. They are amazing animals, and I will see you next time. Until then, this is Ranger Russ from the Meigs Point Nature Center.